You've probably been in a situation where you aren't certain if you should say yes or no to the player's idea. We hear you. Players can be very chaotic at times. They might try to see if they can tame a dragon, or perhaps do a backflip off a tree while casting a fireball. But here's the truth. It's okay for GMs to say no. And today, we're breaking down when and why no might be the best thing for your game, and how to say it without causing issues with the GM and player dynamic. So let's talk about how limitation can lead to creativity. If every idea is allowed, the world can stop making sense. We often fear limitations. We believe that it will stifle creativity. However, limitations can actually serve as a catalyst for creativity. There's a saying out there that necessity is the mother to inventions. So limiting player choices can actually force them to think outside of the box and to come up with creative solutions. Additionally, saying no protects the integrity of the game world. It is your job as the GM to keep the world believable and consistent, even when it's full of magic, monsters, and mayhem. No can be used to create challenges for players. Also, no can be applied in various aspects of your RPG campaign, such as setting limitations or resources, characters, or other story elements. A prime example of that I experienced is when I joined an RP guild that was, with vampires, and it was a dark themed and stuff like that. And so, obviously, they gave me the answer of no if I was to want to play as like a Templar or a Paladin or a Vampire Hunter. It would not have made sense. So no was the right thing to do. And I had to play within these bounds, right? By saying no to certain things, you can elevate the importance of what is allowed, making the experience more valuable. Going back to that thing, right? So there was within that RP guild a way that you can progress and use certain magics and stuff like that. And if you weren't powerful enough, if you hadn't completed the training for your character, you couldn't be allowed to have access to the more powerful spells. So that was a way of no. So you had this thing that you wanted to then work towards, right? So saying no isn't being mean. It's about being a steward of a shared story. And that means making sure that everyone, including you, are enjoying the experience. So how do you say no without shutting down fun? And the key is to redirect and not just simply reject. Don't just say no, but offer a path that could work. It goes back to that thing in my career where they talk about don't just say no, give me an alternative, give me a solution. The same thing applies here, right? For example, a player might ask, can I just teleport inside the dragon and blow it up, from within? The GM, you're going to say no. But you could explain that, hey, no, but that's not how teleport works. But if you want to try crawling in through the mouth, and maybe we can talk about how risky that is and what kind of saves you would need to do to accomplish this, right? You didn't just say straight up just no. You understood their intent, what they were trying to do. You raised the stakes and you made it into a true challenge fitting of what it should be. You said no, but with style. Another example that I had was one that I experienced, right, is where I wanted to kind of use this, the dark shadow magic for my character in a unique way to kind of have these, summon puppets and stuff like that, right? And when I asked the question, because that was not the norm for this type of spell class, they said, maybe, that I couldn't do it normally, but if my character took these additional and learned a little bit of this other form of arcane, then they would allow me to mix those two methods together to create what I wanted, right? And so, therefore, they said no, but they also gave me a solution on how I could achieve that, right? So another thing is that, once again, going back to the thing, having where boundaries is okay for games, right? Saying no helps establish boundaries, and it helps make everyone feel respected and consistent with the immersion of the world, right? Obviously, in different worlds, different campaigns are going to have different set of what is acceptable, of what is in the rules, and what are the boundaries, right? If you play a game where it is lower magic, where things are more serious, the boundaries are going to be a little bit more different than if you play a game where magic is everywhere. The sky is the limit on what you could do, and more silliness, right? There's flexibility on what those boundaries are. So as a GM, you are the guide, and sometimes the guide has to steer the party back to the trail. And, the thing with these boundaries, it is good to set them early. The best time to discuss what these are is during session 0. And, as I recommend, take a look in my session 0 video. So you go ahead and set the tone, the limits, the expectations. Let the players know what creative freedom, it is and how it's awesome, but that there are still rules that need to be followed. Boundaries aren't walls. They're like the edges of the sandbox. And sometimes, you can bend and flex those boundaries. And players, trust me, will get very creative within those boundaries. And they will test the limits of those boundaries. So just have good communication. Be transparent for the reasoning behind your limitations and stuff, and encourage player feedback. Make sure that you guys are in alignment of what those limitations are, and if something is not working well, be open with one another. So yes, creativity is awesome, but so is structure. Just like magic is awesome, but unbridled magic will destroy your world, right? So don't be afraid to say no as long as it serves a purpose. It fits the story, and the fun and stuff. Have you ever had to say no as a GM? Or had a GM tell you no? Well, share, your situation with us in the comments below. I want to hear what was the case, and if the GM handled it well, or you GMs, how did you handle some of these things to kind of rein people in a little bit? So we hope you enjoyed this video. That's it for today, and thank you for watching.